evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson Tonight. In the summer of 2020, mobs of Joe Biden voters destroyed big parts of the city of Minneapolis. They looted stores, they burned a police station, they murdered people. But they did this, we were informed at the time, in the name of something called racial justice. But then we saw that some of the mob turned out to be privileged white kids, the children of lawyers from Bethesda. But they said they were rioting on behalf of so-called marginalized communities. They were working for racial justice. And because of that, they couldn't be punished for what they did. Nor, by the way, were they required to wear COVID masks like the rest of us. That's how holy their mission was. They're exempt from the normal laws of civilization. Kamala Harris raised money for them like they were missionaries. You probably remember that. But do you recall what happened next in Minneapolis? That's the part of the story the media had no interest in covering, and they never do. The iron law of liberal social activism is that you never revisit the scenes of your moral victories. You give a speech declaring yourself a good person and you go home. You don't return to Selma or Soweto or Ferguson, Missouri to see how the people there are doing, because it's not about those people. It's about you and your newly enhanced moral authority, which is instantly convertible to political power and cash. Ask Barack Obama. But in the spring of 2021, one reporter decided to break with protocol and go back to Minneapolis a year later. He wanted to see what racial justice had done for the city. His name was Michael Tracy, and as you can imagine, he writes for Substack, not the New York Times. One night, while Tracy was in Minneapolis, a man walked into a Somali-owned convenience store and murdered the clerk. Tracy wanted to know why that happened, so he started to interview people in the neighborhood. And one of them told him this, quote, African Americans are hunting Somalis in Minneapolis. Why is that? Well, because, quote, they believe Somalis are getting special favors from the government. Are you surprised to hear that? You should not be surprised. Because when government creates a spoils system based on race and ethnicity, and our government certainly has done that, division and violence are the inevitable outcomes. That is true always and everywhere. That fact never changes. And liberals for many decades used to pretend to understand that. That's why they opposed Jim Crow and the Nuremberg laws. But at some point, and it would be interesting to know precisely when and why, liberals enthusiastically embraced the racial spoils system they once claimed to hate. This is unfolding across the country, but it's especially prevalent in places liberals control. The more power liberals have, the more sweeping and rigid the race-based spoil system they create. In California, of course, they have absolute power. And that's why the governor of San Francisco has just announced they will send you money if you have the right skin color.
More cities and counties in the Bay Area are starting guaranteed income programs for the most vulnerable people in their communities. The Silicon Valley Guaranteed Income Pilot Program says it'll target people of color, undocumented and mixed-status families, and women-led households. 150 families will get $1,000 a month for 2 years with no strings attached.
The most vulnerable people in the community, if you're the most vulnerable person in the community, you get $1,000 a month. But that specifically does not include the homeless guy ODing in the park on fentanyl if he's white. If he's white, he can die because if he's white, even if he's dying, he's by definition not vulnerable. California now has many programs like this. The state has now proposed a reparations program for the descendants of slaves. It seems simple, but there's a problem with it. How do you know who qualifies for reparations? It's been a long time. It's been more than 150 years since slavery. And Americans have made a lot of babies since then. And many of them are interracial. So at this point, there are plenty of white people in America who are descended from slaves. There are plenty of black people in America who are descended from slave owners. That's just true. So how do you know who qualifies for government reparations? Well, of course, there's only one way to find out, and it's old-fashioned Nazi race science. Nazi race science. So the state will have to certify the racial purity of its citizens in order to send them money. That's going to have to happen. Do we really want to go there? Do we really want to do that? Amazingly, liberals really do. The city of San Francisco just fired its elections director, a man called John Arnst, because he is white. We're not guessing at that. The president of San Francisco's election commission, Chris Jordanek, confirmed that was the reasoning. And we're quoting, "Our decision," he said to the man who was fired, "was not about your performance, But after 20 years, we wanted to take action on the city's racial equity plan and give people an opportunity to compete for a leadership position. Fired for his skin color. Aren't we against that? Didn't we have a civil rights movement to stop that? And by the way, in this specific case, the guy who got fired, John Arnst, single-handedly ended widespread corruption and incompetence in San Francisco's election. He had the job for 2 decades. They used to have ballot boxes turning up regularly in the San Francisco Bay. That was fraud. He stopped it. But his skin color was the problem. The shade of his skin was more offensive to liberals in San Francisco than fraudulent elections. Now, there was an outcry over this, and Arnst ultimately got his job back. But the city of San Francisco, the government, not just the people, the government, still endorses the idea of punishing people based on their skin color. The city of San Francisco just launched a separate guaranteed income program, this one for, quote, pregnant black women. It pays up to $1,000 a month. And that program got more than $5 million more in state funding, so it's expanding now to Los Angeles, Riverside, Contra Costa County, Alameda. The left-wing group Expecting Justice Just put together this promo for the program. Watch.
Many people don't realize this, but here in San Francisco, Black and Pacific Islander women have a significantly more risk of maternal mortality, infant mortality, and pregnancy complications than other people. And people also don't realize that this risk is primarily due to racism, both structural racism and the racism that birthing people and mothers experience when they're interacting with physicians and other medical providers.
So that is, every word of it, a racist lie. There's precisely no evidence that structural racism exists in this country against the community she's talking about, and none whatsoever that it causes higher infant mortality. There's no science whatsoever. That's just, again, a racist lie. But more to the point, nobody who says birthing people should ever be in charge of handing out money to mothers, much less taxpayers' money. But of course that's happening, and that tells you, well, this is a grift. This is a scam designed to shunt money from people who make it to people who vote for the right party. And that's why Sheila Jackson Lee recently demanded billions of dollars of reparations, because that, she said, would have been a much better way to deal with COVID.
Interestingly, a recent peer-reviewed study from Harvard Medical School suggests that reparations for African Americans could have cut COVID-19 transmission and infection rates both among blacks and the population at large.
So she's obviously a fringe character and easy to make fun of. But it wasn't just Sheila Jackson Lee. That was the official position. That was the prevailing view of the Democratic Party in 2020. Vote for us and we'll give reparations based on skin color.
Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee has proposed a bill to form a commission to study how to do reparations.
When I am elected president, I will sign it.
Would you sign that bill?
Yes.
Yes, would you sign it?
If the House and Senate pass that bill, of course I would sign it.
I firmly support Congresswoman Jackson Lee's bill to create a commission to study reparations.
Would you sign the bill for reparations?
Yes, I would. I already support that bill.
There are things that we need to do in this country that have been a long time in coming. One of those is to move forward with reparations.
So again, it's hard to overstate just how crazy and divisive that is. In order for that to work in practice, you would have to take people's blood and figure out what percentage they were of one race or the other, maybe measure their heads. You would wind up with Nazi race science, with racial purity tests. And no decent person wants to live in a country where the government does that. It's obviously a dead end and a terrible idea. And it would, of course, promote violence and division. So that's a non-starter when you think about it. But Joe Biden decided he was going to get around a national debate on reparations simply by just doing it, throwing it in the Farm Bill. Biden, right after he took office, allocated billions of dollars in farm aid based on race, just on race. A judge, thankfully, shut that down. But they didn't slow down in their effort to create a racial spoils system. They don't care about what it does to the country. So Kamala Harris suggested that certain communities, based on their skin color, deserve faster hurricane response. So there's an entire civil rights department at the Justice Department a division designed to stop the government from rewarding or punishing people on the basis of skin color. That was the whole point of the civil rights movement. But they're doing nothing. Of course, they're encouraging it because Democrats run the government. So as a result, California just launched yet another basic income program, this time for trans people. Really, how's that going to work? How do you prove you're trans? Can anyone even define what that means? No. But here's San Francisco Supervisor Raphael Mandelman bragging about how much taxpayer money London Breed gives to people for being trans.
Every single year, this woman comes forward with groundbreaking and unprecedented investments in queer people. In the most vulnerable queer people. She focuses on the transgender community, and she's talked about some of it, universal basic income in San Francisco, unprecedented investments directed at unhoused trans folks.
The most vulnerable people. Really? How are we measuring vulnerability? When The View supports and celebrates your existence every single day, when every fashionable person in America posts tributes to you on social media every week, how vulnerable are you? But let's get right to it. Let's measure that by household income. Is the household income of the average trans person in America higher or lower than it is on, say, an Indian reservation? Is it higher or lower than it is in, say, rural Iowa? And by the way, what is transgender? On the current application in San Francisco, there are 97 different gender options available, 19 sexual orientations. These would include aromantic, demisexual, dyke, pansexual, same-gender loving, and scoliosexual. So at this point, probably not going to get California back into the realm of functional and sane. 20 years from now, that will be a deeply poor state presided over by a small group of incredibly rich people. Every normal person of all colors will have left and moved to Florida. Probably no fixing it at this point. They'll be cutting the redwood forests, selling them for money. You know exactly where this is going. Look at Bolivia. But what can the rest of us in the other 49 states learn from what's happening in California? Subscribe to the Fox News YouTube channel to catch our nightly opens, stories that are changing the world and changing your life. From Tucker Carlson Tonight.